The movie starts in a dining room where two women are eating and suddenly one, Morgan, attacks the other, Kathy, out of nowhere. After some time, Lee Weathers is driving to the station where she is going to inspect Morgan, a robot prototype. Lee is an expert, so she is needed to handle the case discreetly. She drives up to the gate and drives inside while her handler tells her to update him on everything. She gets out of the car and looks around until she meets the project manager, Ted. He walks her inside and tells her that Dr. Shapiro is in police custody but he will be here tomorrow. He shows her to her room but she wants to meet with the people involved in the case, even Morgan. Later on, she gets a call from her handler who tells her to be more aware of the team and to be suspicious of all of them, and to be cautious but to keep Morgan safe at all costs. Then she hears a noise and goes to the bed to find Amy, a scientist who works at the facility. They're having a conversation while Amy is trying to find out more about why Lee is here, but she's just being generally nosy. Later, Lee goes down to the kitchen and finds Skip, the nutritionist, cooking dinner. Ted is also there to tell her that they can meet Kathy now. Ted and Lee get to Kathy's room and talk to an injured Kathy. She's under some medication but Lee wants to talk to her alone, so everyone leaves. Kathy is trying to blame herself and not Morgan because she feels like she is careless and takes responsibility for the incident. Kathy is acting like Morgan is a real person because she showed emotion before they put her in bad positions. Even though Lee is smiling, Kathy still thinks that she's an evil woman. Lee then meets with Dr. Simon, who shows her his work, the creation of synthetic DNA. They use nanotechnology to infiltrate real DNA and change the cells however they want. Morgan is their third attempt after two of their first specimens died out after having problems. Morgan was functional as an infant and developed quite early. She is a hybrid biological organism and acts like a real child while playing with Amy. She even has birthdays, and Simon gets a little choked up when he is watching these videos. But Lee is more interested in the incident. Simon doesn't know the cause, but he suspects it is because they stopped letting her outside. Morgan wouldn't stop the assault, so she had to get shot. Simon thinks that they can still save Morgan by teaching him to become better in these situations. Simon takes Lee and Ted to the lab where they're working on Morgan. They meet Darren at the control room, but Lee is focused on Morgan, who's listening to loud classical music while playing chess. Darren asks Morgan to turn down the music to meet Lee. Morgan slowly walks over to Lee and they officially meet each other. Morgan knows who Lee is, the risk management consultant who's here to evaluate if Morgan is a viable product for the company. Morgan doesn't feel great after hurting Kathy and looks genuinely sad about it. Ted tells her to save the evaluation for tomorrow, and Morgan affirms that she's feeling bad about it, but they will talk about it tomorrow. Morgan is stuck in her room, asking questions about her existence while she dreams about her time in the forest with Amy. Later at dinner, everyone is at the table while they ask Lee questions about her job. Darren and Brenda are together and meet at their job. They are also involved in the project and think that Morgan is conscious and should have rights, a statement that Lee disagrees with. As they argue, Dr. Cheng walks in, calms everything down, and offers support to help Lee reach her decision. Then out of nowhere, Lee starts speaking to her in Chinese. Chung was involved in another incident where lots of people lost their lives, but according to Simon, Morgan is more advanced and less dangerous than the others. Later, Chung tells Lee that Amy took Morgan away from the permitted area to explore, and that might be why she lashed out. Because they showed Morgan the world outside of what is permitted. At the same time, Morgan gets up from her bed and watches while Lee is looking at footage of Morgan playing with the others. Lee then notices that Morgan is awake, so she decides to go back, but she notices someone singing and follows the voice to find Skip out on the porch listening to music. He wants to know more about her, but she doesn't talk much. Only asks questions about the rest, like Amy, who was also outside. Amy goes into the control room to find Ted and they talk about Lee, who Amy doesn't like. Amy checks out the footage of Morgan's activity and disables the cameras to go talk to Morgan. Outside, Lee and Skip were talking when he decided to kiss her, but she didn't accept, so he apologizes and blames it on being alone for a long time. Meanwhile, Amy is talking to Morgan to comfort her and give her confidence for the psychiatric evaluation. But Morgan only wants to hear about the world and the environment outside of the facility. Amy loves Morgan and wants to take her to the lake. They talk about it so vividly that Morgan can even picture it in her imagination. They even find an injured deer in the forest and Morgan kills it. The next day, Lee was on a run when a car almost hit her, but she continued running until she got back to the facility. She goes into her room and gets ready for the day while packing her gun. She goes to the control room where she talks to Amy about a new doctor arriving for the evaluation that Amy isn't allowed to be involved in. Simon shows Dr. Shapiro where Morgan is kept, but to him, she's nothing more than any machine, but Simon isn't happy with the way Shapiro talks about Morgan. Shapiro and Lee get introduced and head inside to conduct the evaluation. They want him to sit behind a glass protector, but he wants to have closer contact with Morgan, despite the risks. He convinces them to let him in and he goes inside to talk to her while the others watch on. He sits down and opens his binder as he tells Morgan to just be herself and answer the questions honestly. He wants to know why she is feeling sad about Kathy, but she tells him that it was an error and that feeling sad is the correct response. He then asks if she considers herself a person, but she doesn't. She also doesn't consider herself superior, just different. He then asks if she likes it in the facility, and she tells him that she likes the music and friends. But when he asks if they treat her like a friend, she tries to defend them and her thoughts. They then talk about the day that she was meant to go to the lake, but an error occurred that kept her from going. Then she mentions that she can demonstrate love and sadness. But when he asks about anger and fear, she looks odd and starts talking about his family, which gets him off his game. Then, Shapiro asks if she would love him if he allowed her to leave the lockdown and go to the lake with Amy. Her feelings are not relevant and she would accept his decision, but he presses her, trying to get a reaction. He then asks what she would do if he recommended her termination. Lee thinks this is going too far because Morgan is crying and gets pushed to the edge and attacks him, biting off a piece of his neck. Darren now has to get the gun again and tries to shoot her, but she blocks it and takes down Darren too until Lee shows up, so Morgan turns off the lights and escapes. Lee chases her down the hall with the dart gun, but Morgan has made it outside to find Amy. She runs to her, but Lee shoots her from behind and Amy is very concerned about Morgan. Later, Morgan wakes up tied to a stretcher. She is concerned about hurting Shapiro, but then notices that she's been restrained. Chung tells her that they have decided on a plan of action, but Lee has told corporate about the incident with Shapiro and a containment crew will be here the next day. Simon wants to process the data here. Simon is getting emotional, so Chung, whom Morgan calls mother, sends him away. They all get ready to put her down, and even though she tries to beg them to stop, they have no choice but to deactivate her. After injecting her with a sedative, Chung gets emotional too and walks out of the room. That night, Chung comes to talk to Simon, who is devastated by the termination of Morgan but doesn't want to talk about it. Amy is also torn apart by it, just like Darren and the others. Lee watches on when Darren refuses to inject the last meds to shut down Morgan and walks out, and Brenda finds him because she agrees with his decision. Lee gets into the lab to administer the drugs herself, but when Ted tries to stop her, she takes him down. But before she can shoot him, Amy shoots her with the dart and she wakes up in Morgan's bed, in a daze. She feels suffocated and she hears Ted talking, apologizing about what they did, but he feels like they needed to do it to save Morgan. He refuses to let her out because there are more people from corporate coming, but he just leaves her in the cell. Meanwhile, everyone is getting all the supplies they need to keep Morgan alive because they plan to escape with her. Kathy comes by because she doesn't know what's going on. Morgan is barely waking up while Amy tries to get her up with Darren's help. Morgan is a bit disoriented, but she hits Darren and knocks him down to stab him with the needle and injects the sedatives inside him, killing him. Ted comes in with the gun, but she takes it from him and shoots him in the stomach. Lee watches as Morgan kills Ted. Outside, Brenda is packing the things while Skip tries to stop her. Inside, Morgan tells Lee that she now knows Amy is the only one who truly loves her and now she feels like herself again, and she leaves her in the cell. Morgan and Amy are outside, escaping. Skip wants them to stop, but she just runs off telling Amy to stop him. Skip goes to the cell and Brenda is driving down when Amy stops her to tell her about what Morgan has done. Brenda is worried about Darren, but Morgan is behind her with a gun. Brenda tries to calm her down, but Morgan is about to shoot her, so they get in a fight that Morgan wins easily. Morgan then goes to Amy to tell her not to be scared and give her the gun to take to the car because she's going to see Chung. Lee is still stuck inside while Chung is giving a video log about Morgan's incident. The day is breaking when Morgan finds Kathy in the house and takes her down too. Lee finds a way out as Morgan is in the house, killing Kathy. Lee escapes through the ceiling and finds Skip, who warns her about Morgan, but she goes in anyway. Skip loads his gun, and as Cheng is giving the final review about Morgan, it walks into the room. Morgan is saying goodbye to Chung as she comes into view of the camera after killing Simon. Morgan kisses Cheng and suffocates her in front of the camera until she dies in her arms. Amy is outside, scared of what she's done, when Skip comes and tries to take the gun from her, but she is visibly in shock. Meanwhile, Lee is in the house, looking for Morgan, and she finds Chung, dead in her chair. She goes further until she gets attacked by Morgan and they get into a violent fight inside the room. Morgan easily gets the upper hand and they both fall out of the window where Morgan knocks out Lee. Skip tries to stop Morgan, but she knocks him down too and gets into the car with Amy and drives off while Skip tries to shoot her. Lee gets in her car too and starts to chase Morgan and Amy. Morgan drives down the dirt road while Lee follows and gets closer and closer to them. After taking a turn, they get side by side and slam into each other until Lee crashes into a tree. Lee is not badly hurt and she finds Skip, but he stops her from taking her car because she's hurt, but he takes her to find Morgan. Morgan and Amy are finally parked and go up the mountain through the woods. Skip and Lee also get there and she loads the gun and tells him to stay in the car. She goes into the woods where the two are at the stream. Lee follows them down to the lake where Morgan finally gets to see the thing she's been dreaming about all her life. When Lee shoots the gun, everyone hears it and Morgan heads right for the sound. She waits for Morgan in the woods, but Morgan sees her and dodges the shot. They get into another fight and Lee holds her own using a stick, but Morgan impales her on a branch and runs away. Morgan gets back to Amy, who wants her to stop this madness, but Lee shows up behind her and they fall into the water. Lee holds Morgan down under the water until she stops moving. But Lee isn't done and shoots Amy as well. Lee goes back to the car, but Skip has too many questions, so she shoots him too. The movie ends while her handler is talking to someone else about Lee's performance because Lee has been a robot like Morgan this whole time. With that, the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.